Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Pete today. Pete is an individual that reached out to me from up in Wisconsin, and he's got some interesting things that happened to him back quite a while ago, but I'm going to go ahead and let him kind of set the stage, and thanks for coming on the show, Pete.
Yeah, no problem, Jeremiah. Thanks for letting me. My name is Pete. I was born in 1967 in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. Just to set the mood a little bit, like if you've never been to Wisconsin, when you get up past the sand barrens, like midway through the state, the northern half starts like the lake country. Minnesota's like claim to fame is, 10,000 lakes. They actually have like 13,000. Wisconsin has 15,000. Alaska has over 1 million. So it's swampy lake country up here. My encounter happened in 1979, and seriously, like, the reason I came on this show was like I wanted to tell my story to thousands of people that I knew would believe me. I never said anything for probably 40 years about this. And when I first started telling people, they would look at you like you were crazy. You'd say, oh, hey, that's a cool story. You want to hear a Bigfoot story? And, you might as well be running around telling people you've seen Bugs Bunny running out in the woods, because it's just so fanciful. And so anyway, I didn't tell my story till probably 5 years ago. And I was watching Bigfoot podcasts and stuff, and I thought, man, that'd be cool just to get this out of my chest. I'd been trying with people that I knew, and like nobody was trying to hear it. They're like, yeah, sure, whatever. But about 5 years ago, I got the courage, and I text Steve Isdall from How to Hunt about my encounter, and it was kind of bland because he was reading it, from an email. So my encounter happened in 1979. I was 12 years old. My dad owned a racetrack and a junkyard here in Tomahawk, which is a little community of 3,500 people. And being kids, I was the youngest of 13. Having the junkyard, we always had junk cars to drive around, but we didn't have driver's license. So in my town, you could look from my house to the parking lot of the police station. This is 1979. And see if the squad car was there. If the squad car was there, you could get in one of Dad's junk cars that ran, and you and a couple of your buddies go cruising out in the boondocks or whatever. So we'd wait for the cop to, pull in the station, and we knew we'd get out of town, but we had to drive out of town because we didn't have a license. I was 12 years old. So one particular night, probably September, I had taken a 1972 Toyota Tercel for a joyride out the junkyard, but I did it at night. And if you can kind of picture this, if you looked at a map, obviously north being north, Tomahawk, or if you had a T, Tomahawk would be down on the left corner of the T. You go up to the top corner of the T, one road goes left, one road goes right. The road that goes left is 28 miles long, it's Highway E. The road that goes right is a 4-mile stretch called Highway O. So it's about 3.5 miles out of town to Highway O. I get to Highway O, I take a right, and I'm noticing that my headlights are getting dim. So I roll down the window. When I rolled down the window, like you could hear the cicadas and crickets and bullfrogs, it's just brr, brr. So I lean my head out the window to listen, and the lights are getting dimmer and dimmer. So I turn off the dash lights, turn off the radio. I'm like, okay, I got to turn this car around and get it back home. Well, the car ends up dying about a half mile from this 4.5 mile stretch of Highway O. And I'm like, damn, like, I got to get this car back. Dad's going to notice it's gone next morning. It's going to be hell to pay. So I get out of the car. There's like a muskeg area, probably half the size of a football field. On the side that the car was broke down on, there's another smaller muskeg field kind of on the left, which is indicative of a swamp. Cattails growing up and stuff. So I'm kind of debating what do I want to do. It's a long walk back to town. It's probably like 11 o'clock at night. So I start walking across this little 2-lane county road, 4-foot gravel on the end, going down to the swamp on both sides. And it's like 90% full moon with a little bit of cloud cover. So you can literally see, pretty much everything still. Well, I hear a noise and I look over and I see like the tallest pines that are probably like 80 foot on the edge of the swamp, maybe 60 footers, are shaking back and forth. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And then I see the next tree shake and the next tree shake. And then 2 of them are shaking like someone's pulling on them. Now, typically the biggest animal we would have up here is black bear. The state record's like 783 pounds. So I'm thinking it's got to be a black bear. So now I'm getting kind of scared. I kind of walk back to the car and I'm thinking, should I get back in the car? And I'm like, hell no, I don't want to be stuck out here, with whatever that is, or that bear trying to dig in the car. So I'm like, I'm just going to start walking real fast. As I'm walking pretty much as fast probably as a 12-year-old could do without running, the trees are still moving and they're getting closer and closer to the road. Well, growing up in the 70s, like my exposure to Bigfoot was like Steve, whatever his name was, with the $6 million man, Steve Austin or whatever, where he wrestled Bigfoot. If anybody remembers that show, it was probably on in 1976 or so. That was pretty much my exposure to it. We had ABC, NBC, CBS, so we didn't like ever hear anything. I've heard about Bigfoot. I probably got books in school about him, but to my mesmerment or astonishment, it steps out from the edge of that tree bank into the ditch, which is probably 36 inches deep, and starts walking along with me. Now, everything in me told me, do not run, don't run, because I was trying not to elicit that predator response or, the chase response. But my mind said that and my legs said something different. So I started booking it and I'm looking across at this thing. I mean, this thing's 16 feet away from me. And it's stepping like, well, I was smaller back then, so it probably seems like it was a bigger step when I was a kid, but I would say 8 to 10 foot steps. So as I'm running as fast as I can, this thing is walking, just leisurely clipped with its hands swinging, just like the Patterson film. Now I got like 3 miles to go to get back to the street light where Highway O ends and E starts. If I took a left, I'd go back to town. So I'm like, man, oh man, this is something else. Now, when I think back on it, to me, it seemed like I was floating over the scene, watching what was happening with the Bigfoot on one side of the road and me on the other side. That's kind of what my memory tells me now. But anyway, so I'm running down this road, and halfway down this road, a guy had put up a Quonset hut, which the Army would helicopter them around. You could park like a Willys Jeep in there, a couple of them. So he somehow got a hold of this Quonset hut, and he put it up right alongside the road in Highway O, and he had a street light out in front. And as I'm running, I probably had covered a mile at this point, like looking at this thing just sinking. It's literally just going to reach its arm across the road and freaking grab me and wring my neck. So to say like that I was terrified, there's not even a word to describe the amount of terror that I had floating through me, especially being a impressionable, 12-year-old boy. So anyway, how I keep running. Well, I'm coming up over this little crest of a hill, and I see that yard light where that Quonset hut was. So I'm thinking, man, all right, I forgot. I just got to get to that yard light. And it's probably 3/4 of a mile or a mile distant when I first see the light. So I'm like, yes. And I'm sitting there thinking, I mean, this thing's been running, even if I did a 7-minute mile, I mean, this thing's been walking alongside me running for 10 minutes by now, or 8 minutes, whatever it was, a long period of time. But at this point, it's starting to come into my head. I'm just thinking, there's a billion things coming through my head, but I'm like, man, I'm dead. Why hasn't it grabbed me? When it grabs me, I hope it's quick. Like, what are my parents going to think? Are they ever going to find me? Like, all this is going through your head. So, anyhow, I'm getting closer to the light. I get a half mile away or whatever. It's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And then it just dawned on me, or something, epiphany came to me, that if it was going to grab me, it was going to grab me before I got to that street light, because obviously it's going to want to do it under the cover of darkness. So now I'm like a 1/4 mile away from the light, and I'm getting closer, and I'm getting really scared to get to that light, but I got no other place to go. So I'm like, okay, the plan is when I get like 2 blocks from it, I'm going to, just put it in the final gear that I got overdrive and get up to that house and run into that house. So it's something in me, like if you would ask if I would do that again, would I do this? I slowed down and started walking, like, I don't know, maybe 3-4 blocks away from the light. And when I started walking, I noticed how hard I was bawling, like literally sobbing. And I literally just looked over at it and I said, dude, I will never say I seen you. Like, I got no problems with you. I'm just a kid. I just want to live. I want my mom and dad. And this thing did the, like, Sierra sound thing, like, and like literally talked back to me. And I just kept walking, and I'm like, I'm getting closer. I'm trying to think of anything I can say, because I can tell like there's like a dialogue going, trying to elicit any empathy I could from this thing to spare me. And when I got like a block away from the street light, I just booked it, or maybe 2 blocks away, ran up, started pounding on the door. Bigfoot, I hate to even call it that. That sounds so cliche. Whatever it was, Sasquatch, took a right, started crashing through the woods, and I could just hear crack, crack. I mean, just like a bulldozer was going through the woods. And I knocked on the door. No one came to the door, and they had a 296, 1976, 3 on the tree Chevy pickup, orange one. And I got in there, and man, keys were in there. I thought, they don't come out. I blew my horn for like 5 minutes, and I'm like, there's no way that I'm staying out by this thing. Keys are in the truck. I'm headed to town. So that's pretty much the end of it there. And like I said, I didn't tell anybody. Probably the first time was about 5 years ago. And believe it or not, one of the people I told was one of my sisters. So we had this remembrance party for a guy named Ronnie Proctor up here. He was a Vietnam vet who owned at Northwood Tavern. And Ronnie'd probably been dead for 15 years at this point, but we had a remembrance for him. And my sister walks up to me and she says, Peter, tell about your Bigfoot encounter. And I was like, shut up. Like, why did you do that? And looked at me and she goes, oh, I believe you. She said, because I've had Dogman encounters. So that kicked off a whole nother thing. And she had a Dogman encounter, and the guy 3 miles away from her was having Dogman encounters, and he's been missing for 12 years. And 2 years ago, another guy disappeared like from 3 miles away from there without a trace, like infirm guy that rode a hover around, and no activity in his credit cards or nothing. And about 40 years ago, another guy went missing there. But obviously, no one even thought Bigfoot or Dogman at that point. But so I'm starting to think there's some pretty nefarious stuff going on around here.
So, wow. First off, thank you for sharing that with the audience. I mean, that's an incredible story for something. I mean, for you to go through that as a 12-year-old, that is just incredibly intense.
You know, I've had events in my life like a car accident I had a couple months ago, you know, to where you think about it and you kind of just shake your head and think like, man, oh man. But I'm telling you, that encounter, Jeremiah, for me, like at least 5 days a week, I still dwell on that and literally shake my head and just think like, God, like, is that crazy or what that happened to me? You know, because I mean, part of it's a miraculous thing, and another part of it's just like lunacy, you know, to where you're like thinking you lost your mind almost.
I agree that when the logical side of our brain starts kicking in, it can't handle any of that stuff, and it tries to explain it away. And I haven't seen anything yet, but I've heard stuff, and it tries to explain it away, and it's intense. Do you remember anything about what you saw that day? Like, did you get a good look at the face at all, or?
Oh man, I could see, like I said, that moon was like, it was probably like 98% full with occasional cloud cover. And when them clouds weren't covering that moon, I mean, it was just, you know, almost like daylight out. I seen every aspect of it, believe it or not, except for the feet. I mean, the high brow ridge, higher set cheekbones, flared out nose. Believe it or not, thin lips. Like, didn't have big lips, just had like them thin chimp type lips. Big like horse chiclet teeth. Now thinking back, I don't remember really seeing ears. Definitely had the cone head with the giant trap muscles. Huge hands. Like, I would say mine, or the one that I seen, was 8 foot tall. But part of me, as an adult, thinks it might have been like 9 foot tall. But yeah, the hands on that thing had to be 16 inches from wrist to fingertip, with, you know, fingers like the size of kielbasa. Like, the grip strength that thing would have had in them hands would just have to be out of this world. And I remember seeing them hands as he was walking, because they were swinging back and forth. And like, my biggest fear was like, man, I hope he doesn't wrap them around my neck for real.
Wow. How far down were the hands hanging on the body, would you say?
I would say 3 inches below the knee.
Okay. Were you able to get a feel for what color it was? Maybe like what length of hair, anything like that?
I would say the hair length, I would say, was like 2 to 3 inches. It definitely didn't have like a big droopy fur coat or 6-inch long hair. And who knows? I mean, that could be due to the food source up here as opposed to other places. But color was probably dark brown. You know, there may have been like some orange or red in there, but really I couldn't see with that moonlight. I mean, I would say either black or dark brown. Them arms, Jeremiah, like, seriously, like, them biceps had to be like 35 inches around.
Wow.
You know, bicep and tricep, which is just gargantuan. The forearm too. You know, the forearm, I don't know, probably 20 inches around at the, you know, forearm muscle. Like, this thing should literally be able to grab a car and like crush it like a soda can.
Did it affect you in any way as you grew up? Would you see it in your dreams, or were there any other weird things that would happen to you as you grew up that might be connected to that sighting?
Yeah, probably the most poignant, event that ever happened to me. Um, like I said earlier, there's events that happen in your life where on occasion you think of them and be like, man, that was something else, and kind of shake your head. But
Hmm.
like I said, 5 days a week, at least I sit here and reflect back on that encounter for the last 44 years or whatever, and just shake my head like, did that really happen to me? Like, you know, it's so far fetched that it's hard to even believe it happened to me myself. I mean, it's just surreal. If you were to say, hey, Peter, let me tell you about seeing, the three pig cartoon characters out in the woods, I mean, I'd be like, okay, Jeremiah, whatever.
Right, right. Have you ever seen anything that even comes close to what you saw that day?
Mm-mm. Nope,
No. So no
nothing.
representation of it is even close.
I mean, yeah, Bigfoot, that's it.
Or you know how there's like different versions of it. There's like your Harry and the Hendersons, or there's the like ones where, let's say, like from Exists, or the Patterson Gimlin film version, or did any of those even come close to what you saw?
Well, I mean, not probably quite as cosmetic looking as Harry and the Hendersons, but that would be a pretty good representation of it. And really, when I think about like some of the emotions, like responding to when I started telling it, like, I'll never tell anyone I seen you, and I'm just a kid, and I want to get home, like, some of his like facial expressions were kind of like, like, oh, really? I didn't realize that. So it did have like a level of emotion to it, or curiosity at the very least.
Oh, so you think maybe, I mean, that could go a few ways. Maybe he understood you, or perhaps he was just like, what is this little creature making noise now, and what's coming out of its mouth? Maybe he was just curious at that. We don't know.
Right. Yeah. But regardless if it was curiosity or empathy or what, I mean, it wasn't just like, one of my cats, which was 100% instinct.
Mm.
There was some level of restraint or, you know, apathy or empathy, towards me, and probably my bawling. And I know I often think a lot, like, I wonder if like shedding them tears saved me that day,
Oh,
like if I would have been more stoic, might I never have been heard from again? Or you analyze it every way, almost every day of your entire life.
mm.
And, try to think back on certain little things that you might have missed, and you overanalyze parts of it. And, I mean, the fact of it, my encounter was pretty intense. I mean, that the thing was 14, 16 feet away from me for 15 minutes. Uh, yeah, not super dramatic, but it was pretty traumatizing. Still is.
I
I
bet, yeah.
really I don't think I've ever had a nightmare over it, or uh, anything like that. But I'll tell you, when I go camping, boy, like, if I hear a frog moving, I'm, like, ooh, what is that?
Right. Yeah.
Because I
Oh,
mean,
I bet.
obviously they're real, and I mean, I know that without a doubt. So I mean, I know they're out there, and it wouldn't put it past one to come visit campers, like they reportedly do.
Did it have an older look to it or a younger look, or did you get any feel for the age of it at all?
To me, it looked like it was like what a 40 or 50-year-old human would look like.
Sure.
Like it had like what I took to be as like beginning crow's feet, because I've reflected back on that thousands of times too. And then based on like the roughness look of the teeth, and yeah, it looked like it had some seasoning to it.
In the Tomahawk area, it sounds like you've never heard any other stories of anyone seeing a Bigfoot in that area.
Uh, Not the Bigfoot, but the couple Dogman stories I kind of briefly talked about. There is also a guy like 25 miles north of Tomahawk like 2 decades ago, was driving back from Monaco, which is a resort town, and got to a highway named Highway K, and a Dogman ran out in front of his car. And he started the Northern Wisconsin Dogman Research Center or something like that. I'm not sure what it is, but it's up there. But other than that, Bigfoot, nope. Like, I'm the only one that I know of. There are sightings like 60 miles northwest of Tomahawk that have been on podcasts, like in Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never heard of any other ones in Tomahawk.
So sometimes we talk about Dogman. If it comes up organically, I don't go out and pursue it just because, to be honest, it freaks me out a little bit. But since you brought it up, what kind of interactions were these? Were these like pretty wild ones, or?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll actually just tell it.
Okay.
I mean, this one-time shot anyway.
Sure.
So when my sister walked up at that cookout, she said, "Tell your Bigfoot story." And I was like ready to strangle her. I'm like, you know, like, shut up. She's going to think I'm crazy. And then looked at me and could see like my reluctance. And she goes, "Oh, don't worry. If you have a Bigfoot encounter, I believe you because I've had a Dogman encounter." So come to find out, she starts telling me about her Dogman encounter. When you turn on Highway O, and I told you Highway E goes like 27 miles, to the left. Highway O is 4.5 miles long. There's one road off of that road that's like a 1/4 mile dirt road. It's called Bellevue Road. So starting to tell me the story, and I go, "Where was this?" And she said, "Off of Bellevue." And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting, because my Bigfoot encounter was, a 1/4 mile away from Bellevue Road when I got to that guy's Quonset hut. The start of it was like 2.5 miles down." So I go, "Well, tell me about your Dogman." Now, again, I'm kind of going just off memory, but she said when they moved out to Bellevue, a neighbor come up to her and said, "Hey, keep a close eye on." It was like a 9-year-old. And Ann was like, "Well, what's up with that?" And he went get into it. He said, "Just keep an eye on them. We're out in the woods, So she moves in. They get settled in a month or two later. It was pretty early after they'd just gotten there. Got dropped off the school bus, and he came flying in the front door, slammed the door, and started bawling. And she said, "What's wrong?" And he told her that a werewolf chased him after the school bus left up the driveway. So she kind of attributed it, to overzealous imagination, and just said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, honey," like, okay, werewolf, whatever. So weeks later, she decided to put in a garden. She rototills the garden, and she said it was close to the wood line. She started rototilling this area for the new garden she was putting in, and she said she kept smelling like sewer smell. So she's like out there for a week, and sometimes she smells it, half the time she does, half the time she doesn't. But she started thinking, like, my neighbor's septic must be backed up. So whatever, she just went on with her life. Well, within a day or two, she was doing dishes in the sink, and the sink overlooks the backyard. And she said she happened to raise her head and looked on the wood line. She said there was a werewolf standing there, a Dogman. And she said that when she looked up, she could tell that it locked eyes with her. And when that happened, when that eye connection was made, she said it sprung down to its knees and put its hands on its knees and jumped so high up in the air. She said it had to be 30 feet high up in the air back into the wood line and was just gone. So at that point, she knew that story, her 9-year-old, was true. So she's like, "Okay, now I'm like super freaked out." And she goes, "I feel like a terrible parent because they told me about it." And I was just like, "Yeah, whatever." And now this thing is really out here. So shortly after that incident, they started having it on her roof of her trailer. Then doorknob shaking started, tapping on the windows, and she said she literally seen the claws tapping on the window, which would be like pretty terrifying if you ask me.
Yeah.
Well, and the doorknob thing happened like every night. So at this point in the story, her ex-husband, who is like a 60-year-old ZZ Top beard, biker with the chain wallet and the greasy blue jeans, comes walking up upon her telling me the story. And he goes, I thought she was crazy. Like, she's talking about there's a werewolf. And Bigfoot was telling me he's chased by a werewolf. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, man, these people have lost their minds. Like, my kid's crazy. But he's a biker. He's a gun aficionado. So she said, we just come out here and spend the weekend. Mm-hmm. So he said he brought his 12 gauge and like a 357. And now he's telling the story. And he goes, we're not sitting there. And he goes, something starts jiggling the doorknob. And he goes, I'm looking right at the doorknob. And, kind of telling me like he thinks it's a prank or, whatever. And he goes, but then I heard it jump up on the roof and started running across the roof. So he runs out the back patio, with the 12 gauge, whatever, with probably a flashlight taped to it or something. And he's seen it just leap off the backside of the building. So, they got out of there within months of that. But during this time, getting back to that road, Highway E goes 27 miles to the left, Highway O, 4.5 miles to the right. A guy named lived 5 miles up Highway E from where I turned to go on Highway O. Found out about having a Dogman issue, and he had been having a Dogman look in their cabin window that him and his dad, shared, still sitting there listening to it, but reaffirmed, that there was something out there. So I'm like pretty intrigued at this point. He called her and he said, hey, this thing's been looking in my window like every night now. And he said, I'm going to go kill the thing. And next morning they found car keys and wallet. Now keep in mind, this is 7 miles out of town now, on the countertop, and was never seen again. It's been, I think, 13 years now.
Whoa.
The guns are missing, everything. He just disappeared. They've had, one of my buddies owns an insurance company here, and he's taken out scent dogs, cadaver dogs, all over that property. And they went, searching for the body. Like every 3 years, they go out there with dogs and do, massive searches. And so that's the second part of it. Now, 3 years ago, a man named just got his third drunk driving ticket. This guy is probably 400 pounds, drove a scooter, lived 2.5 miles from where my encounter occurred, like 9 miles away from where it disappeared 13 years ago, and like 5 miles away from where it was having her Dogman issue. He gets the third drunk driving, gets out of jail, gets a ride home. This guy like can barely walk. He lives like 7 miles out of town, 50 yards back on the little gravel driveway with a house with a barn. And to get his mail at the end of the driveway, he parks his pickup right next to the steps of the house, and he'll get in that truck, drive the, 30 yards or whatever it is to the mailbox, grab the mail, back the truck back up. That's how, infirm he is. So he went back home, and then the mailman started noticing the mail was piling up. So he looked into it and called the cops, and the cops went out there. No sign of, no credit card activity. He was on like food share. There's no food share activity on his card. Just disappeared without a trace.
Oh, wow.
And who knows? I mean, that's speculative as to me trying to pin that onto a cryptid. But when you think about it, Jeremiah, like all these 4 incidents happened within less than 10 miles of each other. And then the last instance I'm going to talk about is in the 70s, a kid that I went to school with, his name was, they had a farm out there too, probably another 5 miles distant. And his brother went missing like 40 years ago. And they said he was just in the house, and next thing we know, we couldn't find him anywhere. And they were like trying to pin that on, thinking he did something to his brother, and that kid, no one's seen hide nor hair of him for like 40 or 45 years. So that's just another 5 miles away from there. So the chance that like 3 people would come up missing in that small proximity with no clues whatsoever other than hearsay of like Dogman talk is beyond coincidence in my eyes.
You know what the scary thing's going to be, Pete? Is that there's going to be people with more too. It always happens. There's going to be more from this town. I guarantee it. Oh my goodness. This is really weird.
Like really, like Jeremiah, I called a deputy sheriff like a year and a half ago in Lincoln County here. And he was like the homicide guy. And I go, man, are you ready for like a stupid story? And he's like, well, I don't know, what's it pertaining to? So I go, just here, I need you just to hear me out. And I probably told the story twice as fast as I did you, just to do a brief synopsis of it or whatever, and gauge his opinion. And when I got done, he literally said, "You're crazy."
Wow.
And I'm like, well, dude, like there isn't like really any homicides up here. So I'm pretty sure you're not that swamped. Like, why don't you open your mind and just kind of look into it?
Yeah. Oh man. Wow. You said there were, there's definitely a few missing people, and man, I wonder how crazy it gets. I wonder if there's people that have encountered portals like out in the woods or just like they walk through something that feels electric, things like that, or I don't know. Yeah, we'll see where this one goes.
I don't know neither, but there's certainly, of course I follow, Pilates,
right.
And Missing 411 and other channels and stuff like Bigfoot Society and Sasquatch Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
That's you, obviously. I'm pretty selective with what I choose, but like that porthole thing, like as bizarre as that sounds, it sounds more, palatable all the time because there's obviously something getting people, maybe 9 out of 10 of them will be found 15, 20 years from now. But man, there's still people missing from 100 years ago. Wow. That nobody's ever stumbled upon or, came across out in the woods or, like a belt buckle and some old leather shoes or something. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's a portal or if it's Bigfoot Dogman and they just chew every bone down, to nothing, right. or what it is, but like, where do these people's clothes go then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lincoln County, Wisconsin, some weird stuff going on. Is Rhinelander in Lincoln County too?
No, that's Oneida, but it's 20 miles away.
Yeah, so it's not that far away.
No, it's really close.
Wow. Oh man, Pete, I'm so glad that you reached out to me, because this one was, I didn't even reach out to you. You just randomly, filled out the form, and I'm glad you did, because this could really lead to some interesting things. But I'm glad that you got the opportunity to share what happened to you way back then with your sighting, though.
Well, I appreciate telling it to where I know 99 out of 100 people ain't going to say I'm a maniac. So.
Yes, sir. And if anything else, you ever run into anything else or hear anything else strange up there, definitely feel free to reach out and let me know what's going on up there. I definitely will.
Like if there's an update or anything like that, I certainly will. And, the last thing I kind of wanted to say is, of the thousands of times that I pondered, this sighting and, like how it could live up here and, like the bear skin and the sparse hair. I mean, it had a lot of hair, but, like a lot of guys like have back hair that's like out of control. Mm-hmm. It was kind of more like that. So I don't know if they put on more hair for the winter months or, or what. And there certainly is an abundance of, berries everywhere. There's raspberries and, blackberries and everything. Like anywhere in the woods you go out here, there's berries. And certainly loads of deer and,
mm-hmm.
Small game. But I don't know, to me, like it just seems weird that a creature, granted a bear or a deer, I mean, yeah, we know about them, but that a creature would literally choose to live up in this environment, because the winters get pretty brutal out here. You know, and I mean, like, the amount of hair I seen on this thing, like, it just seems impossible. Like, it could have stayed warm, you know,
Absolutely.
in the wintertime. Because it's just like human skin, you know, just gray hair.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that's the last thing, my man.
All right, Pete. Well, we'll see where this leads. This is a very interesting one, and listeners got some pretty crazy Dogman stuff out of it too. So there you go, guys. But I appreciate you calling in, Pete.
Yeah, Jeremiah, I appreciate it letting me in. Thanks, everyone, for hearing me out.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right, Bigfoot Society. We've got the privilege of talking to Rick tonight. Rick is a listener from Warren County, Ohio, and he's got some interesting things that happened to him earlier. And it's a pleasure to talk to you. Rick, how's it going?
It's great. Great weather here in Ohio.
Oh, absolutely. Same here in Iowa, which is, I mean, last week was a little bit too hot during the state fair, but right now, pretty good. Rick, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I know we've been meaning to talk for a little bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and pass things right over to you, and yeah, feel free to share what you have experienced.
Okay. Well, like a lot of people that listen to you, your fans, I really got interested in Bigfoots and UFOs back in the early 70s with the In Search Of program and the Patterson-Gimlin film. And so, you know, like I guess a lot of people back then, I had to go to the library. And so I read books, as many as I could. And, you know, I was probably 12, 13 years old at that time. And I was really into it at that age. But, you know, getting into high school and then college and professional life, I, you know, just really, I paid attention to it, but I had other priorities. And never lost interest in it. But with YouTube and the proliferation of videos and podcasts and things like that, it rekindled that interest. And I've, you know, I listen to this stuff on a daily basis. I live in an area that was exclusively farmland up to 50, 60 years ago. It's in the, I can say, the I-75 corridor between Cincinnati and Dayton. But as time has passed, it's been built up mostly with residential housing. And, you know, there's kind of a 10-mile, you know, housing belt around I-75, just because of the transportation. And a lot of people here either work in Cincinnati or Dayton, so they travel back and forth. I live on the last part of my grandfather's farm. It's been in the family for about 140 years. And this area, like other areas around here, is being built up with residential housing. But there still remains a lot of woodlots, a lot of farm fields, a lot of water sources, plentiful deer. On this particular property, I've seen all kinds of animals and birds, plenty of deer, plenty of coyotes, fox. But I never really thought anything what happened to me could happen in this area. So I'll tell you what happened. I'm in the security business now. I spent 16 years in the Army, 14 of that in special operations. And then after that, I was a police officer for 22 years, 17 of that in SWAT operations, and I was predominantly a sniper. So I'm now in my 60s. I'm in security work. So April 13th, get off at 11:30. Always making it home right before midnight. So I think it was actually about 11:58 at night. Drove in the driveway, got out of my car like I usually do, and my habit is that I just go to the rear of my car and I just stand and I listen to what's going on in the woods and hear if I can if there's any animal activity. Well, as I was standing there, I was facing east, and I looked up in the sky and I see something that appears round and has an orange reddish hue to it, and I immediately think it must be Mars. But it surprises me because it appears larger than I would expect Mars to appear. And so I don't see any movement. I don't see any change in the light intensity. I stand there 3-4 minutes probably watching this thing. And at the same time, back in the woods, I hear these knocking sounds with an owl sound right after another. There's like 4 or 5 knocks and then an owl call. And this is repeated, I'm going to say 5 to 6 times. So I'm thinking a bit more about what I'm looking at instead of what I'm hearing. But I thought at the time, I don't know of any owls or any animals that knock. Not around here. So after watching this object and nothing is changing, I decided to go inside, but I noticed an important detail. And that is, I don't see any stars. I look around the sky, and my view is partially hidden due to mature trees, but I don't see any stars in the sky. And I'm inside now, and I'm talking to my fiance, and I'm telling her what I'm seeing and hearing, and she said, "You need to go outside with your binoculars and look at that thing again." I said, "Yeah, you're right, I do." So I grab my binoculars, I go out. It's gone. Nowhere to be seen. And still no stars. So how was I seeing Mars, but there's no stars? So I come back inside, I look on the internet, and I say, okay, where's the position of Mars based upon my location? I look it up. It tells me a direction. The direction is different than where I saw this object. I saw this object due east, and using a horizontal finger technique I learned in the Army, it was about 40 degrees above the horizon. It's an outstretched arm with fingers horizontal. Each finger is about 10 degrees. So it's about 40 degrees. Not perfect, but it's good for general idea. So I come back inside, and I'd taken a picture of it and a video of this object. So I enlarged the photo twice. And much to my surprise, it reveals an object that is generally rectangular in shape, and it has angles and straight lines in it. Now it has this kind of coronal white filaments coming around it, But I think that is more due to the enlargement process and the type of camera I was using. It was just a cell phone camera, so I can't actually say that those white filaments were part of the object. So, come back inside, start talking about it again with my fiance, and she's very curious. She's very interested in this subject too. So I decide the next day I'm going to report it to MUFON. So I do, write a written report, send it. I don't hear anything from them. Okay, that's fine with me. I don't care. But I get to thinking more about the sounds. The sounds, I've just never heard anything like that in the woods in Ohio. And I've spent a fair amount of time in the woods, did some hunting, did a lot of camping. Can't call myself an expert on Ohio fauna or flora, but I'm pretty familiar. So I look up if there are any UFO reports in my county or possibly Clinton County, which was the direction I was looking. Nothing. I'm thinking I can't be the only person that saw this, but there are no reports that I see. So, okay. It was about a week later that I'm watching a video. It's a video taken from a Navy F-18 Super Hornet flying off the USS Theodore Roosevelt back in 2004. This was taken, I think, off to our southeastern coast, somewhere like South Carolina or Florida. And I'm watching this, and it's from the camera taken by the pilot, and I see something that looks really familiar. I'm like, whoa. Let's wind that back a little bit. So I wind it back, start it up again, and I freeze it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks almost exactly what I saw. Like I really saw a UFO. Never in my wildest imagination did I think I would get out of my car, look east, and see a UFO, but it happened. So as time goes by, I really start thinking about the sounds. And so I look up on the owls that live in Ohio. Because I hear great horned owls all the time, especially in the fall, early winter. So the ones I can remember: screech owl, barred owl, barn owl, horned owl. I think there is sawweed owl. But I got on Hotmail, or not Hotmail, but YouTube, and listened to the various owl calls. And what it most closely resembled to me was the barred owl. Now, as time has gone by, and I've heard witness accounts of their encounters, I've heard barred owl calls or mimicking mentioned a couple times. And I thought that's pretty interesting. To me at the time, listening to the YouTube audio of a barred owl, it was very close, but to me in my memory, it wasn't exact. I could be wrong. What also struck me about these repetitive sounds, the wood knocking, it did not sound like a branch being struck against a tree or anything like that, based upon the tone, the consistency of the sound. It sounded more like two machined pieces of wood that were finished. And I immediately thought, okay, could it be like two baseball bats are being struck together? something like that, or clavas. Are you familiar with the clav? It's a percussion instrument. It's,
Yes. Yep.
and it had that kind of ringing, that resonance to it that a branch would not have, or a tree wouldn't have. So that got me more curious. And nobody, thought, I'm looking for alternative explanations. Some percussionist out there hitting very large clavas or baseball bats together, and I thought, nah, very, very unlikely. And it would take a percussionist, because there was a precision in this, the repetitiveness from repetition to repetition of the sounds. There's a preciseness of it. The volume stayed the same, the tone stayed the same, the space between the sounds stayed the same. Now, I wish I had a spectrum analyzer, and I could have recorded that and looked at it, that way, but it didn't have one in my back pocket. So I heard these grouped sounds probably 5 to 6 times. And there was no distinct difference in the space between the knocks and the barred owl call. And that's what I'll call it, because I have nothing else to call it. That's what it resembled. So the more I've listened to people talk, the more I've rolled this around in my brain. It made me do a lot of thinking. Excuse me. So then I looked on the BFRO website, and for a sightings map, and looked at the sightings in Ohio and the listings of sightings in the counties. And much to my surprise, there are, I think, 5 sightings since 2014 in my county. And these were not necessarily seeing a Bigfoot, but hearing rocks clacking together, wood knocks. And I can remember at least one visual. It is a little further south than where I live, about 10, 15 miles. In those areas, there's significant forest for them to hide. So I made a report to BFRO. Didn't hear from them. It doesn't matter. But so the more I've gone through this process of analyzing this, I have become more and more convinced that was a Bigfoot that was making those sounds. Now, another line of investigation that I went on was I have heard from people that on the podcast that many times UFOs sightings are related to or in conjunction with Bigfoot sightings. So I looked up how many, what kind of percentage, and the number I saw was 30%, which was really surprising to me. That's a huge number. And even if it was 5%, that number is significant. So, I thought, what's the connection here? Interdimensional being. My mind is just opened up to a variety of things. Although there's the rational mind and then there's the emotional mind, and I'm trying to separate those two things and trying to operate on evidence and not let my emotions get too involved with this. So I began researching what other are there other cryptids sightings in this area? And not really. I found something back in 1890 or 1882 that was published in the Western Star. It's a newspaper back then of some kind of lizard monster that was sighted by boys on his little ville. It's just north of Waynesville. The men of the area chased this thing into a tree, and it popped out at the tree at the top. It was hollow as a sycamore tree, and it scampered away with the local men chasing. It went down a hole, and it's never seen again. It was the only sighting. But thinking back to my life around here, my family's been around here a long time. Something that I had heard when I was just after my senior year in high school. I was working at a Denny's as a dishwasher, and a couple of people were talking about some monster that supposedly was living over by Caesars Creek State Park. And that got me interested. And so one night, it was probably July of 1978, took my girlfriend. She picked me up in her little Mercury Capri, and we went over there, and I really didn't know the roads. We were driving around in the dark, not knowing where we're going. Okay, and so she makes a turn. She gets stuck. She panics. She's starting to cry. Well, we had to go home. I didn't want to upset her. But I thought maybe thinking back on that was possibly a potential Bigfoot sighting people had seen back in 78. And that may be a stretch. I don't know. But that, in a way, supported the hypothesis that Bigfoot is in this area, along with the other sightings, which made my experience easier to believe, in my view, that it was a potentially Bigfoot. I've been out the last 3 nights, sitting outside after work. It's after midnight, it's going on 1 o'clock, and just listening. And there's such a the cicadas and the crickets are so loud I can hardly hear anything else. I heard some owl call a couple nights ago, but there's nothing at this time. So, that's what I got for you. Did you find those photos?
I did, and so I'm looking at the outline of both of them is so similar. It's incredible how similar it is. It's definitely like it's got to be the same object. There's no doubt.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not the same object, but the same kind of object.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now we have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's probably 18 miles north of us. And if they're man-made, that's a potential place where it could have flown to or from. I don't know how long it had been there sitting. I don't know why it chose that spot. Thinking about the range, I'm pretty good at ranging on land because it was a sniper, but in the air and not knowing the size of the object, it's really impossible. But my wild guess would be it was 5 to 8 kilometers away, or 3 to 5 miles. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. Nothing for 64 years of my life, and then all of a sudden, boom.
The vocalizations, that to me is just as weird as you seeing something in the sky, because you're saying there's a pattern to the wood hits, then what sounds like an owl, And that pattern of wood hits and then the owl noise repeated 5 to 6 times, you said?
Yes. Yes.
That's weird.
Have you heard anything like that before?
Well, I mean, there's usually...
Has any of your guests alluded to anything like that before?
Not exactly the same, but I am curious if the owl noise that you heard was there anything weird about it? Like it sounded really, really big, or like almost like something was trying to do an owl noise but didn't know what it was doing, and it just felt off when you were listening to it?
Well, it wasn't louder than the other sounds. I mean, I'm going to guess at the range, and I was trying to kind of range how far the sounds are coming from. It was off. It was over my left shoulder, and there's a lake back there over my shoulder, about 125 yards, and it's kind of hilly surrounding this lake, so sounds kind of bounce off the hills, and it. I'm not sure exactly how far away it was, but I'm going to guess between 100 and 150 yards. And it sounded like it was on the north side of the lake. And something I want to make clear was the volume of each sound was the same, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
That includes the owl call. There was no appreciable difference that it was louder or softer. There was no space difference between each sound. So it led me to believe that it was two people very much in sync who had rehearsed this, or one person, very unlikely, percussionist who can do an owl call, or a Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And in hearing about, people are saying now that I've heard that Bigfoot are making this sound, they're imitating owls, and the tree knocks are actually not, they're not actually hitting wood, but they're making it with their mouth and throat.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. In this case, looking at this situation, that makes a lot more sense than any other alternative explanation.
Was there anything involved where sometimes people will say, like, well, imagine you hear a normal owl and then it's like a really bad impression of an owl sound. Did it actually sound like a pretty good owl, though?
Yeah, it did.
Oh, okay.
It did.
Okay.
It just didn't sound like the barred owl recording exactly. Right. It sounded very much like it, but not exactly. No, that comes down to, my memory. Yeah. Did I remember it exactly? I think I looked up those recordings the next day, but at the time they were they stuck in my mind. So I know for certain it was most closely resembling an owl call or a barred owl.
Yeah, logically it doesn't make sense that, you have that repeating 5 to 6 times, and it just, I can't logically explain that away. I mean, I would be going to the weirder option as well if I was involved with that. That's just very strange. Yeah.
And we don't have people in those woods.
Mm-hmm.
This wood lot that we own and the portion next to us that our neighbors own, there's just not people back there. That doesn't mean that somebody wasn't back there that night. But this is really an odd place to do that, to try to get attention. There are a lot better places. I'd go over to Caesars Creek State Park and do it out near the campgrounds. I wanted to get attention. Not here.
Yeah, that whole area that I know I've heard there's other Bigfoot stuff that happen in that area. And I know there's UFO stuff. I'm just not a UFO guy, but I know people all the time in that community are talking about the area around Wright-Patterson and Dayton and, you know, the other areas that we've been talking about. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that you've got weird stuff going on. Do you ever hear any other sounds that just don't really, you know, they're out of place or anything else weird? Or?
Up until April 13th, I really hadn't been paying attention consistently.
Yeah.
I you know, like my habit was I'd get out of the car, go to the back of the car, and I'd stand there for a minute or two and just listen. Didn't hear anything, so I'd just walk in the house. But since then, I've been paying a lot more attention. And actually, I started to do some banging some rocks together 3 nights ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just to see if I could get any kind of response. Nothing. And, you know, it's so loud back there with the cicadas and the crickets. Well, it's hard for me to hear anything. I'm probably sure that Bigfoot would have a hard time here get over all the insect activity. Maybe not, but I think once fall comes, first frost, something like that maybe. And I've also thought about getting some clavas or baseball bats and just banging them together. And see if I mean, get a response that way.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'll do after all these insects die down.
It's really interesting, and it doesn't come up a lot on this show, but the whole connection between UFOs and Bigfoot, especially, I'm sure you've looked into like the Chestnut Ridge area of southwest Pennsylvania. Have you ever looked into that?
I have not.
Oh, that'll really blow your mind. So look into, there's a gentleman out there who is collected a lot of reports to do with UFOs and Bigfoots over the years. Stan Gordon, he's got some really interesting books, but there's a ton of things that happen in the southwest part of Pennsylvania in an area called Chestnut Ridge, and just a lot of really weird things. Like there'd be a UFO sighting and then a heavy Bigfoot presence a day or so later. And I want to say even there were sightings where they were both seen at the same time. I think that's a thing. I'm sure people in the comments will let me know if that's right or not. But that's an interest. If you wanted to kind of look into the connection between UFOs and Bigfoot, look up the Chestnut Ridge, Pennsylvania stuff for sure.
Okay, I certainly will.
The thing about this is everything is connected, and there's going to be individuals that come out of the woodwork, and they probably are going to say that they've been experiencing the same thing in the same area. And that's really when the fun starts.
That will be interesting. That will be interesting.
Yeah.
Most definitely. My plan is I'm just going to, I've been hearing some sounds over by the lake at night. Splashing, knocking. It was so muffled that I really couldn't discern what it was. Then I'm going to go down there in the woods, and at night I'm going to find a spot where I can go sit down and possibly get a visual line on that area and see if I can spot anything, and I can hear better. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if other people start speaking up, and maybe we'll get some people who saw that UFO on April 13th like I did. It probably would have been in the area of Waynesville and a little village of Lytle.
Okay. Cool. Well, Rick, This has been a fun one because it's not one that I usually go into, but it's a good way for me to get some more info in an area that I'm not overly familiar with. But thank you for sharing about, man, that would weird me out too. And I hope people that are listening will reach out to let us know that if they've been experiencing similar things in you said Waynesville, Ohio, Warren County area.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, my pleasure, Jeremiah. Love your show. Keep up the good work. Thanks for hearing me.
Absolutely. And if anything else weird happens, please reach out and let me know. I'd be interested.
Yeah, you'll be the first one to know.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.